The summer after graduation was supposed to be the best time of my life. My name is Christina, and just last week, I stood on that stage in my cap and gown while my parents beamed with pride. I felt like an adult, ready to take on the world. When my group of friends started planning a celebratory trip to Los Angeles, I was desperate to go. We were a tight group, 3 girls and 2 boys. They were all waiting for my confirmation so they could book the hotel. I didn't want to be the boring girl who had to stay home while everyone else made memories. But my father is a protective man. When I brought it up, his face darkened. "Are there boys going?" he asked sternly. "Yes, Dad," I replied, trying to sound casual. "We're all friends. It's not right for a young lady to go on a trip like that," he snapped. Then he asked where we were going. As soon as the words Los Angeles left my mouth, he stood up and walked out of the room without another word. The silence he left behind felt like a no. I begged my mother to help. I don't know what she said to him behind closed doors, but to my shock, Dad finally gave in. On the night of the trip, at 8 p.m., he drove me to the station himself. He didn't say much, but he watched me walk toward my friends with a look of deep worry I couldn't quite understand. The station was dim, and the air felt heavy. My friends, Mark, Leo, Sarah, and Chloe, were waiting for me on the platform. We were all laughing and excited, feeling the freedom of being high school graduates. When the train arrived, we climbed into a carriage that wasn't as empty as I expected. Sitting a few rows away were 3 men. They were dressed identically in sharp black suits. They sat perfectly still, their hands folded in their laps. They didn't look like travelers. They looked like they were waiting for something. We settled into our seats, our chatter filling the quiet car. Mark, who had started acting tough since graduation, pulled out a box of cigarettes. "Anyone got a light?" he asked, patting his pockets. "Mark, seriously?" "None of us smoke," I said, rolling my eyes. "Why would we have a lighter?" The train car fell into a sudden, heavy silence. We were sitting quite far from the men in suits, far enough that they shouldn't have been able to hear a whispered conversation over the rattle of the train. Suddenly, one of the men shouted, his voice grating and loud, "I have the lighter!" We all jumped. It was strange. He hadn't been looking at us, yet he knew exactly what Mark was looking for. Mark, embarrassed and wanting a smoke, stood up. "I'll be right back," he muttered. We watched Mark walk down the aisle toward the 3 men. The man in the middle reached into his suit pocket and handed Mark a silver lighter. As Mark reached for it, the 3 men leaned in close to him. Their movements were synchronized, like puppets on a string. They whispered something to him. From where I sat, I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Mark's face go pale. His hand shook as he lit his cigarette. He didn't even stay there to smoke. He practically ran back to our seats, his eyes wide and darting around. "Mark? You okay?" Chloe asked. Mark didn't answer. He looked at the next station sign through the window. We were still miles away from LA. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dark woods and empty fields. "We're getting off," Mark whispered. His voice was trembling. "What?" "No," Leo said. "Our stop isn't for another hour. We've already paid for the tickets." "I am getting off at the next station," Mark said, his voice rising in panic. "If you guys want to stay, stay. But I am not staying on this train with them." We looked back at the 3 men. They had stood up. They began to walk toward us. Their walk was off, slow, jerky, and rhythmic. And they were smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a wide, toothy grin that stretched too far across their faces, as if their skin was made of rubber. "Don't come near us," Mark shouted, standing up and shielding us. We felt terrible. We thought Mark was being rude to some businessmen who had helped him. "Mark, stop it!" Sarah cried out. "Sir, we're so sorry, he's just stressed." But the men didn't stop. They kept coming, those horrible smiles never flickering. "Christina, look!" Mark hissed, grabbing my arm. He showed me his phone. He had snapped a quick, blurry photo while he was standing near them. In the photo, I could see the man's phone screen. He had been looking at a messaging app. On the screen were clear, high-quality photos of all 5 of us, taken from inside the train before we even sat down. Below the photos, a message from an unknown number read, "Bring them all. The boss is waiting." My blood turned to ice. They weren't travelers. They were hunters. "Pull the chain!" Leo yelled. As the men got closer, only a few feet away, the flickering overhead light hit their faces directly. I gasped, a scream catching in my throat. The men didn't have eyes. Where their eyes should have been, There was only smooth, pale skin, stretched tight over their sockets. They were blind, yet they were looking right at us. They were tracking us by our breath, our heartbeats, our fear. Leo lunged for the emergency brake. With a violent screech of metal on metal, the train jolted to a stop. The force threw the eyeless men toward the floor, but they didn't make a sound. They just started to crawl back up, their smiles still perfectly in place. "Jump!" Mark screamed. We forced the heavy doors open and tumbled out into the dark, gravelly night. We didn't look back. We ran into the woods, the sound of the idling train fading behind us. We spent the night hiding in a ditch until the sun came up and we could find a main road. When we finally got home and told our parents a thinned-down version of the story, my father didn't look surprised. He just hugged me tighter than he ever had before. I realize now why he didn't want me to go to Los Angeles. Maybe he had heard the stories. Maybe he knew that on the tracks between home and the big city, there are things that look like men but carry no eyes. I graduated that week, but I learned the most important lesson of my life on that train. Sometimes, the boring life at home is the only thing keeping you alive. The city of Texas is a big, lonely place when you are 25 and living by yourself. I spend my days flipping burgers at McDonald's, lost in the smell of grease and the sound of beeping fryers. My life was normal, boring, even until the night of March 2nd. It was exactly midnight. I was lying in bed, drifting off to sleep, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up. "Father." I picked up, my voice thick with sleep. "Dad? Everything okay?" His voice sounded strange. It was heavy, distant, and shaking. "Son, your uncle is gone. He died an hour ago. You need to get to Dallas right now. Don't wait for morning. Just go." The line went dead before I could ask any questions. My heart dropped. My uncle had been healthy, but death doesn't always give a warning. I didn't think twice. I grabbed my jacket, threw some things in a bag, and ran out the door. The metro station was freezing. The air felt thick, like a storm was coming. I checked my phone. The battery was at 12%. I had forgotten my charger in the rush. I sat on a cold metal bench, waiting. 10 minutes passed. 20. 30. The station was usually empty at this hour, but tonight felt different. It was too quiet. Not even the sound of a distant car or a scurrying rat. Finally, at 1 a.m., the train screeched into the station. The metal groaned like it was in pain. I stepped inside. The train wasn't empty. There were maybe a dozen people sitting in the flickering yellow light, but as soon as the doors hissed shut, a cold shiver ran down my spine. Every single person on that train turned their head at the exact same time. They didn't smile. They didn't look away. They just stared at me with wide, hollow eyes. I felt uncomfortable, so I quickly sat down next to a man in a gray suit. He was holding a newspaper, his face hidden behind the pages. "Excuse me," I whispered, trying to be polite. "Which station are you headed to? Do you know if we're on time for Dallas?" The man didn't say a word. He didn't even rustle his paper. Slowly, he folded the newspaper, stood up, and walked to the very end of the carriage without looking back. He sat in a corner, facing away from me. I felt a lump in my throat. Maybe I'm just stressed, I thought. People in the city are just like this. I looked at my phone. 4%. Then 2%. Then, with a soft chirp, the screen went black. My only link to the world was dead. Panic started to set in. I tapped the shoulder of a woman sitting in the row in front of me. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. My phone died. How many stations are left until we reach Dallas?" She didn't scream. She didn't answer. She simply stood up, grabbed her bag, and moved to another seat 3 rows away. It was as if I was a ghost, or worse, as if I carried a plague they were afraid of catching. The train was moving incredibly slowly now. The rhythm of the wheels against the tracks sounded like a heartbeat. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. My eyes felt heavy. The stress of the news and the weirdness of the passengers took their toll. I leaned my head against the cold glass window and drifted off. The loop. I woke up with a start. The train had stopped. I looked out the window, expecting to see the tall buildings of Dallas. My heart stopped. I was back where I started. The sign on the platform clearly read, Texas City Station. "How?" I whispered. I had been on the train for nearly 2 hours. We should have been miles away. I looked around the carriage. It was empty. The silent passengers were gone. The lights were dim. A wave of pure terror washed over me. I grabbed my bag and ran out of the train, my boots echoing loudly on the concrete platform. I saw the station master in his small glass booth. I pounded on the window. "Please," I begged. "My phone is dead." "My uncle? I need to call my father. Can I use your charger?" The station master looked at me with pity. He handed me a cable. I plugged my phone in and waited for the Apple logo to appear. As soon as it turned on, I went straight to my call logs to see what time Dad had called me. My breath hitched. There was no call. The last call in my history was from 3 days ago. There was no record of a 12 a.m. call. No missed calls. Nothing. I dialed my father's number with trembling fingers. He picked up on the second ring, his voice sounding perfectly normal. Not sad, just confused. "Hello? Son? Why are you calling me at 3 in the morning?" "Dad," I gasped. "You called me. At midnight. You told me Uncle died. You told me to come to Dallas right now." There was a long silence on the other end. "What are you talking about? I've been asleep since 10. And your uncle is fine. He's probably snoring in his bed right now. Why would you think he's dead?" I felt dizzy. "But I heard your voice. You told me to leave the house. You told me to get on the train." "Show me a screenshot of the call," my father said, his voice turning serious. "I can't," I cried. "It's not here. The history is empty." "But I heard you." My father told me to stay put and go home in the morning. He thought I was having a breakdown from overworking at the store. I spent the rest of the night shivering on a bench in the station, watching the shadows dance on the walls. At 7 a.m., the sun finally rose. I took a bus back to my apartment, my mind spinning. Was I losing my mind? Had I dreamt the whole thing? When I reached my floor, I saw my front door was slightly ajar. The wood around the lock was splintered. I pushed the door open slowly. My heart was hammering against my ribs. My apartment was a disaster. The sofa was flipped over, my drawers were emptied onto the floor, and my mattress had been slashed open. It wasn't just a robbery. It looked like someone had been looking for me. I went to the apartment manager's office, my hands shaking so hard I could barely speak. "Someone broke into my room last night," I told him. "Check the cameras, please." We sat in the small security room and rewound the footage to 12:15 a.m., just 15 minutes after I had received that phantom phone call. On the grainy screen, I saw 2 men. They were wearing dark hoodies and carrying heavy, silenced pistols. They didn't look like petty thieves, they looked like professionals. They picked my lock in seconds and entered my room. They stayed inside for 40 minutes, clearly waiting for me to return or searching for a place I might be hiding. If I hadn't received that call, if I hadn't left at exactly midnight, I would have been in that bed. I wouldn't be standing here today. I never found out who those men were. I never found out why they wanted me. I moved out of that city the very next day and never went back to that McDonald's. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that train. I think about the silent passengers who refused to talk to me. I realize now why they looked at me so strangely. They weren't being mean. They were surprised. On a train full of souls that never reached their destination, I was the only one who was still supposed to be alive. Someone, or something, had faked my father's voice to lure me out of a death trap. I don't know who made the call. I don't know what happened on those tracks. But I know one thing for sure. Something out there wanted me to live. The clock on the office wall read 2:30 a.m. For most people, that is the middle of the night. For me, Ivar, it is just the end of another long shift. I am 24 years old, and working the night shift has turned me into a bit of a ghost myself. I am used to silence. I am used to the cold, blue light of computer screens. But I was not prepared for what was waiting for me at the metro station that night. The walk from my office to the station was short, but the air felt heavier than usual. When I swiped my card and walked down the stairs, the station was empty. Usually there are at least 1 or 2 other tired workers waiting for the last train. But tonight, it was just me. Or so I thought. As I reached the platform, I saw a figure sitting on a metal bench. It was an old lady. She was wearing a thick, dark coat that looked too heavy for the weather. She sat very still, her hands folded over a small wicker basket. I tried to ignore her. In a big city, you learn to mind your own business, especially at 2:30 a.m. But as I walked past, she spoke. Her voice was thin and sounded like dry leaves rubbing together. "Young man," she said. "Could you help me?" I stopped. I'm a helpful person by nature, even when I'm exhausted. "Yes? Are you okay?" "I am a bit lost," she whispered. She didn't look up at me. She kept her eyes on her basket. "I need to get to the next platform. My legs are not what they used to be." It was a strange request. The next platform was just a short walk up and across the bridge. But she looked frail. I nodded and offered her my arm. "Sure, I can take you there," I said. As we walked, she reached into her basket and pulled out a small plastic bag. "You are a kind boy, Ivar," she said. I froze for a second. How did she know my name? I hadn't introduced myself. Maybe I was wearing my office ID badge? I looked down. No, my badge was tucked inside my jacket. My heart gave a small, nervous thump, but I told myself I was just tired. Maybe I had muttered my name while sighing. "Take these," she said, handing me the bag. I made them myself. Cookies for the kind boy. I took them politely, though I had no intention of eating them. They felt cold through the plastic, like ice. The station that didn't exist. We reached the other platform. It was even darker here. One of the overhead lights was flickering, casting long, jumping shadows on the floor. "Which station are you going to?" I asked, looking at the map on the wall. "I can tell you which train to wait for." She looked at me then. Her eyes were very pale, almost white. "I am going to Blackwood Creek," she said. I frowned. I have lived in this city my whole life. I know every stop on this line. Blackwood Creek? Are you sure? I don't think that's on this line. "It is there," she insisted, pointing a bony finger at the dark tunnel. "It is my home." I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking slightly. I typed Blackwood Creek Metro Station into the search bar. The signal was weak, but a single news article popped up. My blood turned to liquid nitrogen as I read the headline. Blackwood Creek Station closed permanently. October 2024. The station was shut down 2 years ago following reports of unexplained disappearances and paranormal disturbances. Authorities have welded the gates shut. "Ma'am," I said, my voice cracking. "This station has been closed for 2 years. Nobody goes there." She didn't seem to hear me. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a wad of cash. The bills were old, very old. They looked like they had been buried in the dirt. "Take this," she said, her voice becoming deeper, more urgent. "Take the money. Just get on the train with me. Help me get home." Suddenly, the wind began to howl through the tunnel. A train was coming. But it wasn't a normal train. It made no sound as it approached, no screeching of brakes, just a low, vibrating hum that made my teeth ache. The doors slid open with a hiss. The inside of the train was dim and smelled like old earth and wet stone. "Let's go," she said. She stepped toward the doors. That's when I saw it. She lifted the hem of her long skirt to step over the gap between the platform and the train. I looked down at her feet, expecting to see old leather shoes. Her feet were pointing backward. Her heels were where her toes should be. Her toes were tucked under her skirt, pointing toward her spine. It was physically impossible. No human being could walk like that. A surge of pure, electric terror hit me. This wasn't a lost old lady. This was something else. Something that had climbed out of that closed station to find someone to take back with it. She turned her head. Not just her neck, but her whole upper body twisted in a sickening way. "Are you coming, Ivar?" I didn't think so. My survival instinct took over. As she stood in the doorway, half in and half out, I didn't reach for her hand. I put both of my hands on her shoulders and pushed. I pushed her with every bit of strength I had. She flew backward into the empty, dark carriage. She didn't scream. She didn't fall. She just landed on her backward feet and stared at me. The doors hissed shut. I didn't wait to see the train leave. I turned around and sprinted. I ran across the bridge, down the stairs, and back to my original platform. I didn't stop until I reached the street level. Bursting through the exit and into the cold night air, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, locking all the doors, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked down at my hand. I was still holding the bag of cookies she gave me. I opened the bag and dumped them onto the passenger seat. They weren't cookies. They were small, flat stones covered in gray mold. I drove home and left the lights on. I didn't sleep. The next day, I quit my job. People asked me why. I told them I just couldn't handle the night shift anymore. But the truth is, I can never go back to that station. Sometimes, when I am lying in bed and the house is quiet, I think about that train. It is still out there, moving through the tunnels that aren't on any map. And I know that somewhere, in a station that was closed 2 years ago, an old lady with backward feet is still waiting for someone to help her get home. I just hope she doesn't remember my name.